episode of Dress and Drinks. I'm Leon Wiebers. I am the host of this webinar for the Costume Society of America. I'm a professor at Loyola Marymount University, and I teach costume design. We're really excited to have you all here and to join us today in our series Conversations on Dress. And should you have general questions about CSA's digital content, please contact Conversations on Dress at costumesocietyamerica.com. Really excited today to invite to D&D Laura Camerlengo and Beth Szuhay from the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. Laura is the curator in charge of costume and textiles at FAMSF, and Beth is the head of textile conservation. Both will share their experience and have impressive backgrounds in working at various museums. So please welcome, and they will also be talking about an exhibit that they had, Fashioning San Francisco, which showcases the museum's permanent collection of women's high fashion and haute couture from the 20th and 21st centuries. This exhibition reflects the museum's extensive collection and its deep connection to the cultural fabric of San Francisco. So I would love to welcome Laura and Beth, and the cocktail for today, the Golden Gate Glamour, the recipe is in the chat, and the non-alcoholic version, because we always have a non-alcoholic version for those of you teetotalers, is the San Francisco Sunshine. So Beth and Laura, welcome to Dress and Drinks. It's so great to have you here. And Laura, you're killing me with that button. Tell me more.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here, and I'll just pull the presentation up while we're chatting. The button is by Patrick Kelly. Some of you may remember that working with Phyllis Blum at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We organized the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 2014, Patrick Kelly Runway of Love, and then the show came out to the Fine Arts Museums in 2021 before traveling to the Peabody Essex Museum. And so over the many years of studying and just loving Patrick Kelly's work, I finally acquired my own button. And I thought, since that publication very wonderfully got an honorable mention for the Amelia Davenport, I thought I would wear it for this CSA talk.
Fantastic, awesome. And please tell us each a little bit about yourselves. You have such an extensive CV and bio that I'd love for you just to share a little bit about each of your backgrounds.
Yeah, so I'm currently head of costume and textiles here.
And I am head of textile conservation.
And to just clarify at the outset, we are coming to you live from the DeYoung Museum in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. The Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco encompasses both the Legion of Honor, which you see in the center of the screen, in Lincoln Park, and the DeYoung Museum in Golden Gate Park. And I mention this because if you come to visit, your ticket gets you into both institutions, so keep that in mind. I can jump in, Leon, if it sounds good, with our land acknowledgement, and we thought we would share with some of our background. Okay, great. So we'd like to read to you all our land acknowledgement. Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco respectfully acknowledge the Ramaytush-Ohlone, the original inhabitants of what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. And we further acknowledge that the Greater Bay Area is the ancestral territory of the Miwok, Yokut, and Paquin, as well as other Ohlone peoples. Indigenous communities have lived in and moved through this land over hundreds of generations, and Indigenous peoples from many nations make their home in this region today. Please join us in recognizing and honoring their ancestors, descendants, elders, and all other members of these communities. And my story actually starts in New York City. I was born and raised in Staten Island, New York, one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. The running joke in my family is that I was supposed to be an attorney, and I was in college and had a great professor who advised that if you wanted to have a great career, it was good to follow your passion, something that you were interested in and felt strongly about, because you would always do your best in that role, and you would also find hopefully some personal fulfillment. And so I started to reflect, I was maybe 18 or 19, on the things that I enjoyed growing up, particularly that came down to museums and arts and cultural organizations. And so when I shared this revelation with my parents of, oh, I think I want to change my path and go into working in museums, I think they were surprised, but they were also really supportive and said, well, if you think that's what you want to do, then you should probably try to get an internship and actually get practical experience. And so I cold emailed all of the arts and cultural organizations where I grew up, of which there are many, which I'm sure will be familiar to CSA members, like Snug Harbor Cultural Center and the historic Richmond Town. And the one that replied was Meg Ventrudo, who was then executive director at the Jacques Marchais Museum of Tibetan Art, which you see in this photo. It was founded by a woman named Jacques Marchais, who had been a vaudeville child actress, and Jacques Marchais was the name she had taken.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was built in the 1940s to resemble the Potala in Tibet and is a repository for Himalayan art in the United States, about 1,500 objects from the Himalayas. And I had the opportunity there to work with the executive director and the curator, Sarah Johnson, and that was the entire team. And I went everywhere with them. I went to do research in archives. We met with conservators, and they had this small collection of costume and textile artworks. And that was the first time I really thought about costume and textiles in a museum setting. I met conservators. We talked about how the objects were made, and I just fell in love. And so from there, I went to Parsons, the New School for Design, in a joint program run by Parsons and the Cooper Hewitt Museum. And I had fellowships and internships at the Cooper Hewitt and also at other museums in New York City. And then when I graduated in 2010, I had the opportunity to become a fellow in the Costume and Textiles Department of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Another running joke was that this was supposed to be a one-year fellowship, but I ended up staying on staff there for 5.5 years. And in that role, I really got to cut my teeth as a curator. This was the first presentation I organized in 2010. It was a small focus exhibition of English embroidery textiles from the collection. And you see me sharing objects with my father in the picture. And then I grew to work on small, medium-sized shows. And then I worked to support Dilys Blum, who's senior curator in the department, on 2 major projects, one being Roberto Capucci's Art into Fashion in 2011, and then the other being the Patrick Kelly Runway of Love show, which went up there in 2014, and then later came to the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco in 2021. So after 5.5 years with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the entire time I was there, I was on contract and I loved the museum and my role, but like many arts workers was seeking a more permanent position. And an opportunity presented itself as assistant curator in the Costume and Textiles Department at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, working under then the leadership of Jill D'Alessandro. And it seemed like a really exciting opportunity. I was familiar with the collection and the ambitious exhibition program. And so I came on board in June of 2015 and was able at that point to work on small exhibitions to start. Again, embroidery, you can tell I really love that area. And then eventually grew to work on very large scale shows. So one was Contemporary Muslim Fashions, which Jill and I co-curated in 2018 for the museums, working also with consulting curator Raina Lewis. And this was an exhibition that presented modest fashions from around the world in key areas that were producing modest fashion, particularly for Muslim women around 2017, 2018. And the show would later travel to Germany and New York, and we were really excited when it won a Richard Martin Exhibition Award from the Costume Society of America. And then, of course, after 2018 to 2019, the show traveled, and then we know what happened. COVID hit. And so there was a period of time to do a lot of research at home, which I did for Fashioning San Francisco. And we'll talk about that project next. But we also pivoted our exhibition program, and it opened up a great opportunity to present Patrick Kelly Runway of Love anew at the Fine Arts Museums. And I was really excited in this capacity to be able to work again with Dilys Blum. Bear in mind, of course, this was in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And so we did a lot to refresh, update, and critically reconsider the narratives around the exhibition and Patrick Kelly's work. And we also created the first publication ever on the designer, which coincided with this exhibition. And again, grateful to CSA because it was an honorable mention for the Milia Davenport.
Wow, I didn't know you were this much of a rock star, Laura. We just know each other from the conference and hanging out, and like, I feel like it's a brush with fame.
Oh my God, that's very kind of you to say so. I definitely have felt that way working with various people throughout Costume Society and colleagues now. So that's really kind of you. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it to Beth.
I'm Beth Szuhay, and I am the head of textile conservation. And I don't have quite the romantic journey that Laura had. However, I did become interested in conservation while living on Guam. So there, I just became really interested in working to preserve material culture. I had my BA is in international studies, which is nothing really related to conservation other than a love of history and material culture. So I went on to have various internships, including St. John the Divine, which has a textile conservation private studio.
Oh, they
And
have an amazing textile conservation studio.
yes, they do.
I mean,
And
like their carpet, their tapestry, like they're known for conserving tapestries. The
I
huge
know
tapestry studio is amazing.
that's exactly right. And so Marlene Idleheight was one of my first textile mentors, who is the head of the conservation studio there. And then I went on to graduate school at the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation, and had various internships, including the Fowler Museum at UCLA, the Virginia Fine Arts Museums, as well as Conservation Services, which was part of the University of Southampton in England. And then came
Awesome.
back to San Francisco. And here I'm showing you one of the projects I worked on, which was an exhibition of corsets that was put on view in our education gallery in support of the Vivienne Westwood exhibition in 2007. So this was one of, I just want to put out many of your members probably are very familiar with the evolution of invisible mounts. So this is a buckram mount, which is basically the starch gets activated in water and that gets glued together. And they're very heavy and kind of cumbersome and messy to make. I think had we done this maybe 10 years later, we would have been using Phosphape, which is the polyester that heat sets. And then now, as technology continues, we probably would have done this in 3D printed mounts. So look for that evolution. But then in 2011, I left the museums for various reasons to start a private practice. And so I'm just going to show you a couple of my costume projects, which were really fun. This is owned by a private collector in the Bay Area who collects all sorts of theatrical costumes. And this was worn by the silent film actress Theda Bara as she was Madame du Barry.
Is that real ermine hanging from that skirt?
Some of them are.
Oh,
So the
wow.
ones that are on the actual purple lace, the inner petticoat, are real ermine tails, and then the other ones were like silk ermine, like fake.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it was still kind of fun because it came to me in pieces. I don't know if you can see here on the left side of the screen, the bodice and the sleeves were detached. So I had to figure out exactly, based on the few photos that I could find of her, where exactly they should have been attached, and then put her together and fluff out the ermine tails. It was a fun project.
That's
But
fantastic.
then I also got to work on some other smaller costume items. This is a
That's
doll
so
that was,
precious.
isn't she sweet? I love the before and after because her before photo to me looks like she had a really rough night. And then the way her mohair hair kind of just went back into shape was really fun. And then, I don't know, anyway, so she's lovely.
It takes a lot out of a gal to manage all those dwarves.
Yes. And then 2 years ago, I returned to the museums, and this is kind of our segue slide into showing the exhibition that we want to highlight in this presentation, Fashioning San Francisco, A Century of Style.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so
And actually, just before we leave this slide, just take a look at how much goes into putting an exhibition together, the number of people, and also having to figure out the sequence of events on how you're going to install, making sure that, for example, we had sections where we actually had mannequins elevated on different levels, and then platforms had to be put in after they were installed so that we can install the lower level of mannequins. And we'll talk more about that later.
That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you for that. That's awesome. Oh, wow.
So yeah, so as soon as Beth came back, she jumped right into fashioning San Francisco, a century of style. That was a project that had been in the works within the larger department for over a decade. Originally, Jill D'Alessandro and Kristen Stewart, a name that will be familiar to many people in CSA, were working on it, and the initial idea centered around I. Magnin. And then we had a transformative gift of fashion from a donor by the name of Christine Supez, 20th and 21st century high fashion and haute couture, which came in 2018 and really transformed the collection. And so the narrative really broadened. Many more gifts came into the collection. And so the narrative somewhat changed. But it was a great opportunity to show our permanent collection of high fashion and haute couture, which is one of the strongholds of our department. If you haven't visited the museum or are less familiar with our collections, our artworks in the textiles department are about 15,000 artworks covering 125 countries or cultures.
Wow.
So we're a very broad-based department. We range from Coptic fragments from the 3rd and 5th century all the way to 20th century and 21st century fashion and contemporary fiber arts. I do want to note and acknowledge that if conservation counts the number of objects in the collection, the number is higher because they will count also things like fabric and furniture, which are not under our department. But needless to say, there are a lot of textiles at our museums.
Yes.
So both museums, both the de Young and the Legion of Honor, have collected costume and textiles since their respective inceptions in the 19th and early 20th century. The two institutions merged to become one collection in the 1970s. And costume was displayed initially in, air quotes, permanent galleries in conjunction and in dialogue with American art's collection of portraits. And as you can see here in this photo from 1934, it gives you a sense of the evolution of fashion and dress, personal style, and also San Francisco history. Because when the de Young was founded, we really functioned actually as initially as a history museum within the city. We preserved a lot of local history.
That's kind of great. That lineup from 1934 is really just fantastic to see that in relationship to the portraiture.
Yeah, I mean, the one downside, I'll go back a second. The one downside of this gallery, which all of our, costume folks will notice here, is that there are sunlit skylights above the costumes, which pose problems for us in the long term, but it is, in fact, in this photo, a very beautiful display. And we understand with audiences, it had a lot of resonance as well. So there were many different presentations of fashion, costume accessories, other material over the collection. We can go on and on about that history for hours, but I do want to highlight perhaps the most well-known presentation of fashion in recent memory, which was New Look to Now, French Haute Couture from 1947 to 1987. This was shown at the de Young Museum in 1989 and co-organized by Melissa Leventon, a name that I know will be familiar to many CSA watchers, and the late Stephen D. Pietri. And it really showcased, as its title suggests, French fashion from the museum's collection. And so with the Primo de Pietro earthquake, a new museum was built here in 2005. And some of you may be familiar with the large-scale exhibitions that were shown during Jill's tenure when she was here, Vivienne Westwood, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Yves Saint Laurent. Often the strategy there was to show these big exhibitions and have a few of our holdings in some of the exhibition presentations. But prior to fashioning San Francisco, we hadn't had a major showing of our collection since this exhibition in 1989.
Oh, wow. I sadly did not see the exhibit that you just had up, the New Look to Now, but please tell me you have suits of armor in your collection because that's just thrilling.
We do have suits of honor, and I think the display and what I've seen of the photographs, I was not here in 1989, but it was a beautiful pairing of the permanent collection galleries and the fashion collections. And if you don't have it, you can still find the book online, so I encourage you to pick up a copy because there are great pictures in there too.
Yeah, because I was chatting with some friends the other day in CSN. It was like, when was the last time we talked about a suit of armor? And literally, here we are today. So you were reading my mind.
So we do have actually an exhibit that is coming to highlight 7 tapestries from the Battle of Pavia, and it also will incorporate arms and armor. So
Oh, cool.
it's in November.
Yeah, so if you like the idea of that pairing, come to San Francisco because we'll have a nod to it in a couple of months.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Fashioning San Francisco, A Century of Style just closed at the DeYoung Museum. It was on view from January 20th through August 11th of 2024. The exhibition explored our permanent fashion collection, looking at how key moments in San Francisco's fashion history intersected with socio and political changes in the city. And part of the thesis was elevating and sharing women's stories and women's history. So you'll notice if you look at the presentation here, you'll see all different heights, sizes, scales of mannequins. You know, in our collection, we have couture pieces, but we're showing, as we like to say, real women's clothing. We traced photos of the wearers in contemporary newspapers, local photographer pages, to be able to document where the clothes were worn. And then we worked with Elizabeth DeSole, who is a wig maker in New York. She often works with the Costume Institute to create custom headpieces for each mannequin. And I mention this because the hairstyles were derived from the photos of all of the women who wore their outfits. And so it's a little bit different than perhaps a traditional fashion presentation that's celebrating a single designer or a runway presentation or that vision, because here we're really celebrating the personal style of the women who wore the outfits. So there were 7 sections of the exhibition. Right now, you're looking at a section called After the Ball. And each section had a couple of kind of unifying attributes. One being that they were each situated in a different architectural landmark in the city, with the idea of all of these women who, many of whom were entrepreneurs, philanthropists, social leaders, being incorporated back into the fiber and the landscape of the city. Here, if you're familiar with San Francisco, you'll recognize the War Memorial Opera House, which is also a place where many of these gowns were worn. And then you'll also notice that this is rendered in this gauzy, it was sort of like a cool white curtain that was over a blue painted background. And this was done to evoke the feeling of fog, which is almost inescapable in San Francisco. And it was the idea of our exhibition designer, Julia Pike, who not only thought it would give this sort of nod to the geography in place, but also thought it would make this great sort of set design that would allow the costumes to come forward and really be very present in the space. So another example from the gallery was a section called Well Suited. This was very much, I'd like to say, the baby of Talia Spielholtz, who is our assistant curator in the department and whose graduate research at NYU focused on the dress of women in politics, particularly congresswomen in their portraiture. This architectural element was taken from I. Magnin department store, which if you remember that, please put that in the chat. That would be a fun fact, which was really the preeminent luxury department store in San Francisco for most of the 20th century.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, their facade, and building was known as the Marble Lady. It was this big marble structure with these large rectangular windows. And so the shape of these niches is a nod to that. And again, Julia Pike, our designer, was thinking about, this might be a great way of situating many of the women who wore these clothes, who were very much involved in city activities, situating them back downtown. But throughout each section of the exhibition, we not only tried to underscore local history, of course, but also connects San Francisco to national and international narratives. So in this section, Talia did such a beautiful job talking about the suit as an emblem of male authority, often three pieces, a jacket, a vest, and a pair of pants, and something that women use, particularly in the 20th century, to navigate spaces, public spaces that were once under the preserve or domination of men. We could think of business, we could think of philanthropy, we could think of politics. I think we're seeing that a lot now. But each idea for each section was to connect not only to San Francisco as place, but to larger national and international themes and trends.
Because these are amazing. So from my perspective, the top row, second from the left, the long dress, maybe it's a dress suit with a coat over it. What is that coat made of? It looks like it has some amazing texture to it.
Okay, so I believe it's wool and metallic thread knit. Yes. And it is
it was a double knit.
It was a double knit. And so was it a sleeveless jacket? If I recall correctly, that's almost like a vest and the dress underneath with the buttons down the front.
Oh God.
It has a little twist to it, but it's interesting you called that out because, one of the things we questioned and interrogated in the exhibition was how collections are built by relationships, right? So donors might get involved with the museum, they might bring friends in, and the question then is who has a relationship with the museum and who's maybe been excluded or just not part of those dialogues. And so those came initially as a loan from the estate of a woman named Leola King, who was a Fillmore district matriarch, the Fillmore being called often the Harlem of the West. She owned a series of jazz nightclubs in the Fillmore district where she brought entertainers like Josephine Baker into San Francisco. And we were really excited to be able to represent her and her sartorial legacy in the show, and also really excited that now the estate has given these ensembles, there were two in the show, to our museums. So we're able to preserve them in perpetuity.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, I lived in San Francisco in the mid 90s, and I remember hearing her name and hearing about that. And that's just amazing. I have another question about the leopard print suit that's below it. Are those feathers at the neck and the cuff? What are the, that is just, that is also so sharp and crisp and interesting.
Yeah, no, it's monkey fur.
That's even better.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
It's very delicate, and also very, yes, it's a showstopper, really. That dress.
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
and the green one to the left of that is also fantastic.
Oh yes, yeah. So the one you just asked about is John Galliano for Givenchy from the collection of Dodie Rosecrans, who was a well-known international style-arbiter. And the one on the left is a Jeffrey Bean custom design that came in from Christine Soup as his gift. It is a 3-part ensemble, and it's reversible. So on one side, it has this sort of green and black Dalmatian print. On the other side, it has a houndstooth. Yeah, it's green and black houndstooth. And it's also, both of them, I think, are really show-stopping pieces.
I mean, we don't have enough reversible clothes anymore these days. Let's just start there.
It's just practical. It makes good financial sense. Yeah.
Talk about work to play. I mean, come on.
Exactly. So I won't walk through every section of the exhibition, but I did want to call out the final section of the exhibition, which was about global aesthetic influences. And here I wanted to acknowledge the work of Abram Jackson, who's our director of interpretation at the museums. And this section was replete with garments by Western designers who were looking at cultures outside of their own for inspiration in what we would consider today cultural appropriation. And Abram was an amazing partner with myself and Talia on dialogues around this, because we really thought about how we could situate dynamics of power and complicate some of the more traditional narratives in fashion history around how these designs form. So for example, if you look towards the center of the screen, you will see 2 beaded dresses short little beaded mini dresses that come from Yves Saint Laurent's 1967 Africa collection. Of course, a seminal 20th century designer whose legacy endures today. He was someone who was often celebrated for his embrace of multiculturalism in fashion as connected to modernity. But it's a bit more complicated when we consider that he was born to the French Algerian colonial classes, and that many of the cultures from which he was borrowing or taking, really, were French colonies well into the 1960s, including the Bambara and Mali. And so part of what we do in the labels and text around this portion of the exhibition is try to share those dialogues to get people to think sort of critically about what is happening socially and politically that leads to this kind of hybridization of fashion, if you will. And then we have a lot of context, and I'll sort of get to the next point, in the catalog. So if you missed the show because it just closed, each section of the exhibition is represented in the accompanying catalog, which is also a handbook of these holdings. There are essay texts from a variety of different contributors, including a focus essay from Laura Garcia-Vidren in our conservation department on weighted silks, which we know drive every curator and conservator crazy. But if you want to learn more about any of these topics and take a much deeper dive, I encourage you to check out a copy of the catalog, because we do have all of that documented in perpetuity in that text.
That's amazing. What a beautiful cover too. Oh my gosh, that cover art is fantastic.
Thank you. It's an Alexander McQueen dress from his final collection, which was presented after his death. It also came in from Christine Supez. And then to the right, we have one of the dresses, and you can see we also paired it. In some instances, we would pair it with documentation for Vogue or other fashion magazines that would speak to sort of the broader resonance of some of these designs. And then in the back of the book, we have an appendix that chronicles everything you could possibly want to know about each ensemble, who wore it, where they wore it, media lines. Beth will talk more about that. But we did include small snapshots of the donors and wearers as a nod to give acknowledgement to them and their contributions.
That's fantastic. Actually, it's really interesting. So you've talked a lot about working with donors and wearers in this already. And I mean, this could be a whole webinar unto itself. Just the interaction and the work, the working with donors who give to a museum, who give to a collection, whether they wore it or not. But in this case, you have both of them in terms of, you know, respecting their privacy or how well they want to be acknowledged, or if they want to be acknowledged. All those things are such delicate conversations to have when working with donors in these ways.
Yes, absolutely. And I think for all of us, it was a lot of dialogue and back and forth with donors, and if they had questions, just sharing as much information as we could so people could make informed decisions about how and if they wanted to be acknowledged. In general, I will say though, there was a lot of civic pride around the show, and I think a lot of folks were just, you know, as I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar know, there's a bit of a narrative about the San Francisco doom loop and, you know, all of these really dark narratives around the city. And so most folks who contributed to the show were just so excited for there to be this celebration of San Francisco, to assert that San Francisco, you know, has and continues to have style. Yeah, and I think it was a point of pride actually for a lot of folks, which was really nice and made our jobs, I think, a bit easier.
A little more fun.
And a little more fun.
Yeah.
Actually, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, because, you know, in the news, I live in Los Angeles, and so in the news these days, you know, we're hearing about, oh, San Francisco this and oh, San Francisco, you know, so there's all of this, you know, about the political situation or the crazy things that are happening, or the list, you know, the list goes on. But actually, San Francisco is such a fabulous city. I mean, I really love the very first image of, invoking the War Memorial Opera House, because what a grand place to go to the opera. And the opening night at San Francisco Opera is like no other opening night of any opera company anywhere the last time that I was at, because it was everything from couture to fetish, and it was fantastic.
Part of the catalog was for this to be a handbook of the collection. And that gave us an opportunity to really go through and identify techniques and materials. And that was a major collaboration between the two departments. And that's what we're showing here on this slide. Talia Spielholtz and Laura Garcia-Badren and Anne Getz all working together to identify all of the different types of materials, including the sequins, the type of horsehair, and we actually went a little further. We had a discussion about, well, how far should we go? Because for conservation reasons, of course, we want to know all of the materials that are involved. And but for the media line, necessarily, we were focusing more on what could be seen by the viewer.
Right.
But it also gave us a chance to use some fun technical equipment, like our, microscopes and so on. That was pretty fun.
And that took what, 18 months to do?
Oh,
I forget.
because part of it was also not just that we were working on the pieces that were going to go into the exhibition ultimately, but also we photographed and cataloged many more ensembles for the actual catalog.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, wow.
one of the so actually I'm going to go back one. So what you're seeing is a portion of Dior's Junon. And we did a little bit of conservation on her. She has been a very beloved ensemble that is asked for not only to go on view at our own museum, but also we have loaned it to the Galleria.
Musée d'Arts.
Yes, before I can't return to the museum. But what we've noticed is she's had a little bit of wear and tear, and this gave us an opportunity to do some conservation on her. We're looking on the left side screen, a before treatment photo of her bodice, which had actual baleen stays in them. And you can see in the kind of the center part of the photograph or X-radiograph where the stays are broken. And both Laura and Anne worked to figure out what, since we were going to replace the stays, what material could we use that we would be able to leave in the bodice and not cause future damage. And we ended up using Rigoline, which I'm sure many of your viewers know is a modern corset stay material, and it passed. So you can keep that in the back of your mind if you're making corsets for yourself, that if you use Rigoline, they will be safe for years to come.
Oh, I have a totally technical geek question about Rigoline.
Okay.
So, because in theater we use Rigoline in many different ways, and for whether it's corsetry or other sorts of things. How did you finish the ends? Because when you cut Rigoline, it has that really sharp, rough edge, and it frays because it's plastic.
Well, we used a heat tool to cut it because part of it is it's a polyester, I believe.
Yep.
So you can use a heat tool to cut it, but you can also cover the very ends with. We use it in other mount making. It's also a heat tool, a heat set polyester. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because we often, when we use it, I mean, it's not doing this sort of work. We'll heat it or burn it in some way or melt it so it doesn't continue to do that. So you're doing it with a heat tool in a more delicate way than sometimes we do.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a heated spatula or a heated X-Acto knife. So, yep.
Thank you. That's awesome.
No problem. Just here to help. And so here we are with Juno and Venus, and I'm not sure what.
So amazing.
Yeah, so post-treatment, and to note, these were one of the few fashions in the show that were not part of a personal wardrobe. These have a very special relationship to our museums, in that they were shown in Dior's Fall/Winter 1949 to 50 haute couture collections. They were imported to the city by I. Magnin and Company. And this, of course, was a time when there were live presentations of fashion, by the department stores. So we know they were shown, we have documentation that they were shown in Seattle, in San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And then in November of 1949, Magnin and Company announced in a press release and a big announcement in the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, that they would be giving these to the museums because they felt they were representative really of the pinnacle of Dior's creativity, the best of fashion of this year, and that they needed to be preserved for generations to come. So they're a bit of an exception, but what's interesting, I think, from a curatorial and a conservation standpoint, is they were very hastily altered at different points in their lives. You know, you could think about how if you're doing a presentation and some other work, people might just quickly stitch up the side to send a model down the runway. And I was really impressed in the conservation treatments, the care and thought that was taking to really decipher which stitches were original and which work was original, and then which things could be removed and conserved to help bring each of them back kind of to their original glory, if you will.
Yes, we had both of these in the lab for quite a while, and through various tours or other colleagues coming in, one of the questions they would always ask is, are you going to try and remove those stains? Because there's some stains on her bodice, of course, because they were worn by actual people, and they must have worked very hard. But unfortunately, we made the decision that we would rather leave stained silk than have a hole, because at that point, the oxidized perspiration stains were so brittle in those areas that there was a really good chance if we tried to do any kind of conservation that we would cause more damage. So it's always a dialogue between all of us to try and figure out how far we want to go with the treatments and what the outcome we want to have happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a sort of push and pull around what to do with them and how and what to do, you know, how far to go and when to leave things alone.
Yes, to show restraint can be very hard sometimes, especially when you think you might have the technology. But I do want to talk a little bit.
AI knew that.
We'll get into augmented reality and stuff. Just wait in a minute.
Okay, awesome.
I think Beth is going to talk a little bit about some of the mounting around the show and how that dovetailed with the conservation work.
Just to show this beautiful dress here lying on a table, just hold this image in your mind, because I think we all can agree that to really understand a costume, you have to have it on a form, on a human form, I should say. And for the exhibition, we chose to use Bonaveri Schlappi mannequins, which are commercially available. So the one in the center is unmodified version, who we had their size are 6'2", 6'2", which is really good for a runway model. But as Laura mentioned, we were actually using dresses that had been worn by real people, and they were all various sizes. And so we chose to manually modify the Schlappi mannequin in order to meet the historic silhouette, as well as to make it appear to be just like the woman who wore the dress. And of course, the wigs also work to create that illusion. So we worked with a couple very talented mount makers, and I just want to point out that for the fiberglass mannequins, you really need to make sure that you protect yourself. You can see Mike Lai, who was our one of our senior mount makers, wearing head-to-toe Tyvek and eye protection and a respirator as well in order to do the surgery.
In a spray booth too, which is amazing.
Yes, well, it's also because it had to be done away from the rest of the crew so that they're not breathing in any of the potential very tiny particles. Yeah. And then to go ahead to pad out the mannequin, then to fill in the spaces that we removed, basically, in order to support the dress, as well as to make her look a little more human. And so Anne Getz is along with two very talented art handlers who have a lot of experience working with dresses and costumes, worked to mount it. And so I think we can all agree that she looks a lot different on a mannequin than she did just lying on the table.
Yes.
So.
And, you know, and she went in, so there were a few pieces in the first section of the gallery that were particularly fragile. And about halfway through the show in April, we did a rotation, and this is one of the garments that went in at that rotation. And it was also a really special moment because you'll see it has a session number that says INC, which means incoming. And that was because when the show opened, or just before it opened, there was this outpouring of support from people and opening of closets when news of the exhibition was announced in San Francisco. And this was one of the donations that came in as a result of the exhibition being announced. And we were really grateful that the conservators were able to get it up in time for the rotation so we could actually put it on view, which was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, well, it came in really good condition. It just needed some, some fluffing. That's the technical term.
It is. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it wasn't beautiful. And so then I guess we're moving on to AR.
Yeah.
So we partnered with Snapchat to develop an augmented reality portion. And you can talk a little bit more about that.
So this was a brainchild of the museum's digital production department led by Patricia Buffa. And their team was discussing, this kind of open concept of, wouldn't it be great if people could try on the clothes from the show? Isn't that what you want to do when you walk through a fashion exhibition? You have this visceral reaction to what you see on view. And
of course, the conservators are saying no.
Of course, we were a little hesitant. But, the technology has come so far in recent years, particularly for retail. But there have also been examples of the technology being used in European museums, particularly with Snap. And so they reached out to different companies, including Snap, who came forward to said, we would love to try to digitize and make, augmented reality of 3 dresses in the exhibition. This is one, you may recall it from the famous Abaddon photo with Davina with the elephants, where she sort of exaggerated out. There were 3 different ensembles, Dior, Valentino, and an ensemble by Kazik Wong, who was a San Francisco fashion designer. And what was amazing about the technology was not only that it was a frontal view, but as you can see, you could spin around entirely to get the front and the back and pose. And there was a lot of flexibility. And I was going
to say, and the way that they were able to do that was they came into the museum and into our lab, and I would hold out the fabric, and they took all sorts of photographs all over the entire costume, and we had it dressed on a mannequin and just kept moving it slowly around so they could take more and more photos so that they could imagine how it would look at every angle. And then we had many meetings where we looked at it and over our screens and would give them feedback on, well, that's not really how it would look. And then they would make a little change, and then we'd get to see it again.
Yeah, and each model was scaled to work with different bodies because we get such a wide range of audiences. And it was something that was really, I have to say, really, I think, popular with audiences. And there was a lot of resonance because it gave them this personal connection to what was on view and this opportunity to sort of write themselves into the story of the exhibition. Yeah.
And so I guess we're coming kind of to the end. And so just to kind of tie up this bow, as I said at the beginning, when you're thinking about putting on an exhibition, you have to think about all the sequences of how you're going to go ahead and install each ensemble. And then when you're deinstalling, it's kind of in reverse. So so this is a lot faster than in reality we were, but just to show you how many people it takes in order to deinstall one mannequin or 2 mannequins.
Yeah.
And all the coordination between all of the people as we bring them safely back down to earth.
And various machines, and handling, especially with the niches, that was a big part of the exhibition.
Right.
And just to acknowledge, this video was very kindly made by Randy Dotson, who's the head photographer for our museums.
I'm really curious about the VR work, or the augmented reality, AR actually, and not VR. how I love that you talked about the process of this. So VR and AR are really similar in that way in terms of trying to capture that. And there's a lot of conversation about how they could make things more accessible in the museum situation because you can view things from a distance. A couple of years ago, I explored using VR in my teaching costume history class, and really some of the things of encountering that was making sure that people had Wi-Fi or the correct speed and stuff like that. So how did you overcome some of the tech challenges for that? You know, so when the person walks into the space and is read by the camera, and then, you know, and then the garment is projected onto them. So I can imagine the tech, I'm imagining a tech nightmare. So tell me more.
So we cannot speak at length to the tech component because our work was more interpretive in thinking about if there is a velvet fabric, how should that drape and feel if it's going around a virtual body? What I could say was really amazing was our digital team led the charge as far as the technology was concerned. And then there was a point where they were installing the screens in the museum, and a team came from Snap. And they were like 5 or 6 programmers all sitting in a corner coding, which is something we don't see in our daily work. Yeah. And every time somebody would test something, they would go and recode, and a nuance or a small facet of the screen would change. And it was just amazing to see their own sort of delicate dance and how they were feeding the computers and the screens to create these digital, you know, versions of the garments. But unfortunately, I don't feel like I have enough knowledge in the technical capabilities. For CSA, we'll see if Patricia can join us.
Yeah. Ooh, super cool. I mean, because one of the challenges of digitizing these sorts of objects or objects of dress is that I've experienced in terms of exploring and experimenting with this is the inside. So so in this case, you're not actually looking at the inside because it's projected onto the person. But once you've captured the outside, getting the inside is really challenging because you think it's sort of like, oh, well, I can just do that and it will map back to it. And that doesn't work because it's not quite exactly the same. Or then you're like, well, what if I gently turn the object inside out? But then you just have 2 dresses or 2 things that don't actually, that's really one of the biggest challenges I think in thinking about this is how can we digitize these so people can actually turn them around and use them and look at them and be inside? Because in VR, you can actually shove your head into the objects and you can see, it's actually really cool. You know, you can shove your head in and be like, oh my God, what's going on in there? And if the seams are correct or not, then it's a whole other thing. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating question, and we're also, I think, curious about the topic. So we'll keep you posted if we have any answers, and we can share it with you. How long did this show take to install and then deinstall?
Yeah.
To install, we started with we started mounting the mannequins, and as we would get the ensemble on the mannequin, we would ask Laura and Talia to come and take a look and make sure that we got it right, and then we would move on to the next one or make adjustments as necessary. So we actually started mounting it at least 6 weeks before we got into the galleries, because we had like a cache of mannequins ready to go. And then we continued to, I think it took us, how long did it take us? 4 weeks? That seems like, gosh, yes, I think it was about 4 weeks, because part of it was also, again, like I was saying, there was this very like choreographed dance as we would put up like what was going on up higher, and then they could put the platforms in for the lower sections, as well as putting the drapery up around. In some cases, they would have to put it up and then roll it up so that they could get access to where they were going to use the forklift to put the platform into the niche, and then we would unroll it, and then we could do the next section, and so on. So it took quite a while. However, to take it down, we also had to contend with the next exhibition needs. So we dismantled the mannequins and undressed them in 2 weeks. However, now we have to continue with the condition checking, and we do integrated pest management, which is for what is safe, we put in the freezer in order to kill any pests that might have found their way into our costumes, or we isolate them, and then we have to surface clean them, and then we have to put them back in their homes. And that's probably going to take us through the end of the year.
Well, that's amazing. Did you pay Snap for their work, or did they do it gratis for advertising and visibility?
My understanding is that Snap, I believe, donated their services for the collaboration. But
Cool.
Beth and I are not, I think, the people to opine on contracts. That's a bit outside of our scope, but that's our understanding.
Cool. Did you consciously use black mannequins for the garments worn by women of color, or how did you make those choices?
Yes. So if the garments were worn by, so we picked 3 colors for the installation, 2 tones of gray and 1 of black, trying to avoid skin tones and thinking of colors that would really help just make the costumes pop when they're on view. We did use black mannequins for garments that were worn by women of color, but we also used them in instances where it just paired really well with a dress. So for example, the McQueen dress that we talked about on the cover of the catalog was on a black mannequin because the red just looks so great against the black mannequin. It was just such a brilliant pop of color. But that was something that we did kind of keep in mind, when we were working on the exhibition.
Cool. I heard from staffers in the AR room that people came in wearing leotards and leggings so that there was no interference from their streetwear.
That is correct.
Yes.
People came multiple times to see the augmented reality. The show itself had over 210,000 visitors in the period of time it was up, which was wonderful. And I think at least a third, if not more, of people who went through used the augmented reality, and many people came through multiple times. So we had little hooks in the galleries where you could hang a jacket, but people did at a certain point come prepared to have a digital, an augmented dress placed on their body.
Right. I can also say, besides coming prepared for the augmented reality, we also had people who came dressed for the exhibition. In fact, the last weekend, someone came in their dress that they had made to copy Juno, that she had worn for her wedding gown.
Yeah. So she came on the last weekend wearing her wedding gown that she had worn 11 years before, she said, and was in the style of Juno, and a lot of people got very dressed up for the show. So that was quite fun for us to walk around the galleries.
That's fantastic. Well, and then was there any surface cleaning during the exhibition?
Yes, we actually cleaned the platforms twice a week. Conservation did around the dresses. And we also had every other month, we went in and surface cleaned the actual gowns on view.
I just want to say thank you so much. This was so much fun and so wonderful to see. And just Beth and Laura, thank you for the really in-depth look at this and the wonderful, unusual things that you brought to us today. Really great time to chat with you. Please follow the Costume Society of America on Facebook and Instagram to make sure that you hear about all of our upcoming episodes in Conversations on Dress. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's content, we implore you to make a small or a very large donation to keep this content free for all.